Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Like when a familiar scent just kind of hits you and suddenly you're just flooded with all these memories and
It's
emotions.
amazing.
Well, get ready because today we're going to explore how smell and sound, they actually work together in the brain to shape those experiences.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at this research article from Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory,
Okay.
and it's called The Surprising Link Between Smell, Sound, and Emotions.
Interesting.
And it really dives into this concept of multisensory integration,
Right.
you know, like how our brains are weaving together information from all these different senses to
Yeah.
create like a complete picture of the world.
It is fascinating how our senses don't just operate as these separate channels like we often think.
Exactly.
The reality is that they're all interconnected.
Yeah, and this study is going to reveal some really surprising connections, especially between smell and sound.
I'm excited to hear more about this.
Yeah, to illustrate this power of these multisensory experiences, they use this really clever analogy of a dinner party.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
They ask you to imagine like you're at a dinner party, but you can't smell that delicious food
Right.
or hear the clinking of the glasses or the conversations.
It just wouldn't be the same, would it?
No, not at all. It highlights how all our senses really do come together to create this rich and immersive experience.
For sure, especially in social situations.
Exactly. And for some people, particularly individuals with conditions like autism, where their sensory processing might be a little bit different,
Right.
this integration of all the senses, it can actually be really challenging.
That's a great point. So how did these researchers actually delve into this connection between smell and sound?
Well, they used a classic model in neuroscience research,
Okay.
mouse moms and their pups.
Oh, so we're talking about pup retrieval.
Exactly.
This is where the mother mouse or even like a surrogate caregiver will respond to those distress calls of a pup and they rush to go save it.
Exactly. And that's what makes this such a brilliant model to study this whole multisensory integration thing.
Okay.
Because both smell and sound are essential for this behavior to actually work.
Interesting.
The mother needs to be able to hear those cries from the pup, but also smell its unique scent to be able to find it and retrieve it.
So even in the mouse world, it takes a village,
Yeah,
or at least a fully functioning sensory system to raise a pup.
for sure. What's groundbreaking in this research is that they were able to trace these smell signals going from a very specific brain region called the basal amygdala
Okay.
all the way to the auditory cortex, the hearing center of the brain.
The basal amygdala, that's the part of the brain involved in processing emotions, isn't it?
That's right.
So we're not just talking about smell and sound being relayed here. We're talking about smell actually influencing how sounds are processed before they even reach the part of the brain that's responsible for hearing.
Exactly. And that's what makes this so fascinating. It suggests that these smells are kind of being filtered through this emotional lens.
Right.
It's like having a gatekeeper who decides which sounds are important enough to actually reach our conscious awareness.
Okay, so to recap, we have these smell signals traveling to the emotion center of the brain,
Uh-huh.
and then they're influencing how sounds are processed in the auditory cortex.
Yes,
What happens next? Did they do anything to test this connection?
they did. They designed this experiment where they actually blocked those small signals in the mother mice
Oh, wow.
and then observed what happened during pup retrieval.
I'm on the edge of my seat here. What happened?
The results were really striking. When those smell signals were blocked, the mother's ability to actually retrieve the pups was almost completely messed up.
Really?
Yeah, it wasn't that they couldn't smell the pups anymore. But it's
Right.
like their ability to even hear and respond to those distress calls was just totally impaired.
Wow. So even though they could hear just fine,
Yeah,
that lack of smell just totally threw off the entire pup retrieval behavior.
exactly. It's a really powerful demonstration of how intertwined these two senses are.
It really is. And it suggests that this connection is super strong when it comes to those really essential social behaviors, like, responding to like a baby that's in distress.
Exactly.
This is mind-blowing stuff. So we've established that smell and sound are connected, especially in mice.
Mm-hmm.
But how does this translate to humans?
That's a great question, and one that researchers are actively looking into.
Okay.
While we can't really draw direct parallels from those mice studies to humans,
Right.
these findings definitely open up some fascinating possibilities about how smells might shape our auditory experiences too, especially in social situations.
So if smell can have such a big impact on how a mouse hears and responds to its pups, I can't help but wonder, could something similar be happening in us, in humans?
It's a really interesting question.
Mhm.
And while we obviously can't do experiments blocking smell in humans the way they did in mice,
Right.
there's some really interesting clues that suggest this multisensory interplay might be happening in our brains too.
Okay, I'm all ears. What kind of clues are we talking about?
Well, just think about everyday experiences. Like, have you ever noticed how the smell of freshly baked bread can make you suddenly so much more aware of all the sounds coming from the kitchen?
Oh,
The
yeah.
clattering of dishes or the oven humming, it all just seems to like jump out at you.
Totally. Or like walking into a coffee shop and being instantly drawn to the sound of that espresso machine grinding beans.
Exactly. Those are great examples of how a smell can almost heighten our attention to very specific sounds.
Yeah.
And if you remember, the researchers found connections between the auditory cortex and other brain areas that are involved in attention too, like the medial geniculate.
Okay, so remind me what exactly the medial geniculate. It sounds kind of technical.
Well, think of it as a gatekeeper for sounds.
Okay.
It's this relay station in the brain
Uh-huh.
that filters that constant stream of sounds that we're bombarded with every day.
Yeah.
And it decides which ones are actually important enough to reach our conscious awareness.
So it's like the medial geniculate is saying, hey, the sound is associated with something important. Let's flag it for attention.
Yeah.
And maybe smell is playing a role in influencing which sounds get flagged.
That's a great way to put it. It's not that the smell is changing the sound itself.
Okay.
It's more that it's influencing how our brains prioritize and process those sounds based on like how emotionally relevant they are.
This is making me think about music and how certain smells can really enhance like the whole listening experience.
Yeah.
Like I've been to concerts where they actually like pump in certain scents to try to create this more immersive atmosphere.
Oh, yeah, that's a perfect
Yeah.
example. And it speaks to how these multi-sensory experiences can just totally heighten that emotional engagement.
Mm.
Think about like a romantic dinner.
Right.
The soft lighting, the music, the aroma of the food, it all just comes together to create a mood.
It's like our senses are having the secret conversation in the background, influencing how we experience everything without us even realizing it.
Exactly. And that conversation is likely way more complex and nuanced than we even understand right now.
For sure. So we've explored some pretty interesting hints that this smell-sound connection might be happening in humans.
Right.
But what about people who have differences in sensory processing, like people with autism?
Yeah,
Could this connection have any implications for them?
absolutely.
Mm.
That's a really important question, and it's one that researchers are really starting to look into. You see, individuals with autism often experience these sensory sensitivities,
Right.
either being overly sensitive or maybe under-responsive to certain sounds or smells.
And if smell can influence how those sounds are processed,
Yeah,
I can imagine that could be a really big deal for someone who's already struggling with sensory overload.
exactly. Imagine being in a super crowded shopping mall where all the smells of perfume and food and cleaning products are just competing for your attention.
Yeah.
And now imagine that those smells are also making you super sensitive to the sounds of like people talking and music playing and cash registers beeping.
It would be completely overwhelming.
Exactly. It would be like trying to have a conversation in the middle of a rock concert with this added layer of intense smells bombarding you at the same time.
That's crazy.
And it really highlights how these disruptions in multisensory integration could make the challenges faced by people with autism in those kinds of environments even worse.
This is making me completely rethink how I approach sensory experiences.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about addressing individual sensitivities.
No.
It's also about understanding how all the senses are working together.
Yeah.
Or not working together to shape our perceptions.
Absolutely. It really underscores the need to have a more holistic approach to sensory processing.
For sure.
One that takes into account this complex interplay of all of our senses.
This is all so fascinating, but I have to admit my brain's getting a little overloaded here.
Yeah.
We need a second to process everything we've learned so far. Okay, I think I've had a second to catch my breath here. My brain is ready for more. So we've been talking about how smell and sound can work together, or, maybe sometimes clash in our brains.
Yeah.
But what does this all mean in the bigger picture? Where does this research lead us?
Well, it opens up a lot of really exciting possibilities for understanding how our brains work, both, typically and atypically.
Okay.
For example, if we can really figure out exactly how W smell influences auditory processing,
Right?
it could lead to some new strategies for helping individuals with autism to manage sensory overload.
So instead of just trying to block out overwhelming sounds, maybe we could explore ways to kind of modulate smell.
Yeah,
to help create like a more balanced sensory experience.
exactly. It's about thinking beyond just individual senses and considering how we can use like this power of multi-sensory integration to help people with sensory processing differences.
This research could have implications for things like anxiety or PTSD too,
Oh, absolutely.
because certain sounds can trigger really intense emotional responses.
Exactly. If we can understand how smell impacts that emotional processing of sound, it could lead to new therapies for conditions where sensory triggers are a big problem.
Like aromatherapy is used to create those calming moods sometimes. Could there be a connection there? Could certain scents actually help people process those triggering sounds in a less distressing way?
It's a great question and definitely something that needs more research.
Yeah.
It highlights the potential for combining different sensory approaches to come up with more effective treatments.
Well, this deep dive has really been eye-opening.
Yeah,
It's amazing how much we're still learning about the brain and how our senses all work together to shape the world around us.
it's true.
I feel like I'm seeing things in a whole new light now.
It's a good reminder that the world is this multi-sensory experience just waiting to be explored.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So to wrap things up, I have a little challenge for our listeners. The next time that you're in a situation where you're feeling overwhelmed by sound, just try paying attention to the smells around you. See if you can identify any scents that either make the impact of those sounds stronger or maybe even lessen it.
That's a great challenge. And remember, we still have so much to learn about how our senses interact. Every discovery leads to even more questions.
It's true, and that's what makes this all so exciting.
Exactly.
Well, until next time, keep those brains buzzing with curiosity and those senses exploring all the amazing things around you.